Okay, enough of this. Hi. That was cringe. Ignore that. Tonight I'm going to talk about... What the hell was that? Tonight I'm going to talk about an idea that I'm developing, Marxist Romanticism. Now, I've kind of seen this going around. Believe it or not, I forget the author. Let me look him up real quick. What is this guy? He gave a lecture on it. Who is this? Michael Levy. He was kind of developing it, but he kind of stopped. He never really explored it fully. See, Marxist Romanticism. Typically, the big art movement associated with socialism, or anything adjacent to it, is socialist realism. You know, the Soviet Union, of other things like that. Whereas I kind of hold that socialist realism really became kind of a tired art form. It was one of the mistakes of Soviet leaders was to promote it so heavily to the point where people got really tired of it. Art in the Soviet Union was something that I think they didn't do the best at because they didn't really allow for any individualism or creativity of any kind, which is necessary for art. That's what it's all about. At least art as we know it over the past few centuries has been strongly individualistic. So my sort of synthesis, my solution to this problem is Marxist Romanticism. Now, Romanticism, if you don't know, I'm not talking about just being romantic, pouring your heart out, although that's really kind of what the art is. Romanticism was fundamentally an art movement, and a movement of not just art, but fashion, and just ways of living, which was, I call it new individualism, because really Romanticism was sort of the culmination of feudalism's end. Romanticism, although it began before the French Revolution, arguably, it's kind of debated when it started. I would hold that Romanticism was really sort of the cultural synthesis of a dying economic base, and that dying economic base allowing for more individuality. You see, art, prior to the collapse of feudalism, and really just the open public challenging of feudalism, was not individualistic in the slightest. If you wanted to be an artist, a musician, a writer, most of the time, under feudalism and monarchistic systems, absolute monarchies, you would only be able to do so under either the clergy or the monarch. They would commission you, and that's really the only way that your art would ever see the light of day. I would argue that we are experiencing this again. We are going to be experiencing this again. I may be different from a lot of Marxists in the sense that a lot of them think that some of them think that we haven't entered the next transitionary phase of history yet, as in going from capitalism to socialism. Some of them think that it's already failed with the Soviet Union. I hold that it is still in its process, that you can compare the way that we are living now to sort of the mid-19th century, in which there were already republics which sprouted up, which were challenging the dominant economic base, feudalism, However, they did not yet have world hegemony. There were still many republics at this time. There were many, capitalist liberal republics at this time, which were not monarchies. However, a great deal of the world was still monarchistic and feudalist. And that's sort of how we are today. This is also why the thumbnail of this is Napoleon. I don't like Napoleon, just so you know. I'm not one of these weird people who romanticizes Napoleon, tries to rehabilitate him. I find that kind of silly. He was incredibly despotic. But I would compare a person like Napoleon. I would say that what I commonly say is Napoleon is to liberal republican capitalism what Stalin is to communism, in the sense that he was an early, inconvenient revolutionary figure, and he is inconvenient. I believe Stalin was a pig of a man. However, I think he was a necessary figure. He was an early revolutionary figure, Napoleon, who was among the first to lead the exportation of this new system, of this new social order, this new economic order, and this new hegemonic order, especially. So that's kind of what it is. I'm drawing parallels to the Romantic era, the original Romantic era, and I'm arguing that we're going to see something similar. In fact, I believe that COVID did quite a lot to kickstart what I'd call Marxist Romanticism, in the sense that everyone has to stay at home. Well, in some countries, here not so much. Everyone has to stay at home, and they're led to think a lot more about things. Not just politics, but culture and art. Fundamentally, what all political affiliations agree on at this moment, at least in Anglo-America, in the imperial core of the world, is that culture is in severe decline. Now, this could come from either progressives, who say that it is still bigoted, that bigotry is becoming popular, but it could come from more conservative people, which I don't really take a side, although I'd say that I'm a little bit more socially conservative than a lot of leftists. There's conservatives who think that our culture has degenerated towards, really it could be comparable to the Roman Republic, and the same sort of cultural degeneracy that you're starting to see at the end of the Roman Republic. I would mostly take the latter position. Now, this is not to say that I think progressives are wrong. Bigotry is still something which ought to be fought against. However, the main thing which I agree with the sort of conservative camp on is that it really, you look at the role of sexuality in our culture, it's become ever more commodified. It's become really sort of broken from its, separated from its organic function in humanity. But I won't get into that. Some other ideas that I'm drawing upon in my elaboration of Marxist Romanticism are the ideas of actually I'm drawing a blank here. My goodness. It's been a long day, man. Who is it? I'll think of it later. I'm drawing on a couple people. Now, capitalist realism has somewhat of a role in this whole thing. Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism. I haven't fully read it. I'm in the process of reading it in order to better inform sort of like the more cultural side of Marxism. the idea of capitalist realism, however, is like, I have a few gripes with it. The idea that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, that was very true about 10 years ago. I think that it's completely false now. Now, this is not to say that people are somewhat, I guess, brainwashed into believing that, well, not brainwashed, it's not the correct word. I don't like calling people brainwashed. But sort of led to believe that places like China are not anywhere near a socialist system, or at least not adjacent to socialism, which I don't really agree with. I would say that it still represents an alternative, not necessarily a full antithesis, but it represents an alternative hegemony, an antithetical hegemony. Just because the hegemonic order of a given place is not fully antithetical, right? Just because it is fully antithetical, apologies, it does not mean that, this place, China, is fully socialist or fully communist. I remembered who it was. I looked it up. It's Oscar Wilde. I was thinking Oliver Stone for some reason. Names. But not Oliver Stone. Although Oliver Stone's kind of cool. He's got a really good series on Netflix about American history. Go watch it. He's actually a smart guy. But Oscar Wilde and his position that socialism would be fundamentally better for individualism than what we currently have, or at least what he currently had at his time of writing. I believe it was the late 19th century he was writing this essay. Although I don't agree with a lot of that essay, I do recommend reading it. I take disagreement with this sort of idealism. I mean, he is an author. He's an English author and poet, right? So he's going to be a bit more idealistic than a fully matured Marxist, which I don't claim to be, but I think I'm getting close. He talks about authoritarian socialism, things like that. Which I think if he had lived later, I think he would have seen was probably a little bit dogmatic. But I fundamentally agree with the position that a progressive mode of production, as in, if we lived around 150 years ago at the time of Marx, the progressive political economy, the new hegemony that was developing was liberal republicanism and capitalism, whereas for us now it's socialism and communism. And this is a big thing that I think that Marxists kind of need to keep in mind is we are not advocating for this. We're not advocating for communism because we think it's simply better than capitalism. That's a very sort of dogmatic way of going about supporting something like that. We are supporting this new system because it is the next stage of history, because we believe that capitalism has shown itself not to be infallible, that it is subject to chaos, that it is becoming increasingly more chaotic, and that fundamentally we need to reckon with the fact that there's going to be a new social order in the coming decades. I think that really socialism or communism ideologically nowadays is simply coming to terms with that fact. I don't support communism and socialism simply because I think they're good ideas. I support them because the dominant economic base, the dominant political economy has shown itself to become increasingly unworkable, especially during COVID. So that's kind of what Marxist Romanticism is about. Now, Romanticism, I should really explain. I kind of lost my train of thought there, but Romanticism is fundamentally, like I said, greater individuality that began to develop through the new rejection of this dominant political economy. And you can see this in the fact that Romanticism was mainly popular, although they didn't really call it that back then. It was mainly popular in somewhat revolutionary nations such as France, later the Northern German Confederation, which was the Holy Roman Empire until Napoleon, the guy in the thumbnail, went and wrecked that. Where was I? In Italy also, which was experiencing some Republican revolts, in much of Europe. Now, when I talk about my enthusiasm for Romanticism, commonly I'm met with, that's because you're white, which I understand this criticism. Romanticism, the Romantic era, was a very exciting time to be alive, if you were white. If you weren't, wasn't so great. I'm perfectly willing to accept that. However, I think that we have developed to such a point, that industrial society has developed to such a point where this won't really be an issue. Also, Romanticism itself was not causing the anguish of racialized people, of colonized people. It was not the cultural ideal of Romanticism which was causing these things. In fact, a lot of early Romanticism was very anti-slavery. It was very anti-colonialism. I hold that during the 1848 revolutions in Europe, the Märzrevolution, in which Republicans of France, Germany, Prussia and a bunch of other stuff at this time, and Italy were all uprising against their monarchies. That a very, very profound reason that they were doing this was their detestment of slavery. The common people of Europe hated slavery, and that's simply historical fact. I find it sort of interesting how, with Black Lives Matter and with the new decolonization discourse, which I think are both great things. I think it's great that we're talking about these things. One thing that kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth is that it's been individualized. It's been taken to the individual level. For example, it would be didn't ask, plus you're white. I forget the quote, but that sort of stuff where people tend to internalize that if people are white, they're just inherently biased towards these evil forces of colonization, of slavery, and the like. However, this was simply not true. The people of Europe, and especially, and most surprisingly, the Church in later years, the Catholic Church, I don't believe that Eastern Orthodoxy had much to say, but most Christians were fundamentally against these things. And that's not to say that some of them were not, that some of them did not actively engage in these evils. However, the general populace of Europe either didn't know it was happening, or simply just didn't support it. else can I say? So, really, I think that the sort of Marxist Romanticism, what it sort of entails, it does involve socialist patriotism, which is this big whole thing. I'll probably talk about that at some later time, since that's a big subject right now. Seems to be on the online left, which is the fake one. By the way, this is all fake. Really, what I think is also really profound about this idea of Marxist Romanticism is I think that it is really one of the only things that can stand up to the big tech industry. For example, big tech sort of gives the appearance of individuality. It sort of gives the appearance of entourage, of I can build my own personality. However, I'd hold that with the amount that it has been commodified, the amount that it has been turned into spectacles, a series of spectacles, that effectively all individuality melts away in real life. That's sort of my position on it. So I am writing about this at the moment. I'm a little busy with school, if I'll be honest. However, it really touches something deep about why I became a Marxist. See, I've always played music. I've played music since I was around 8 years old. I learned guitar, and I play a few other instruments. And really, what I've kind of always noticed is that postmodernism has really taken over music to such a degree where really everything is just imitation. And that's another very big facet of, a very big tenet of this Marxist Romanticism thing that I am talking about, is opposition to postmodernism. Postmodernism has effectively turned our cultural zeitgeist into really just sort of more of the same, constant, it's either more of the same, or it's very sensationalized. For example, you're not really going to get attention as like a different artist or an innovator unless you do something weird. You know, a good example is like Cardi B, you know, which I don't hate Cardi B, you know. I'm not gonna make that like boomer argument that you know, she's evidence that culture is in decline, but at the same time, it really says something. I should say that I'm not going to make the argument that she's some moral failure or some moral aberration, I should say. But she is a evidence that our culture is in decline. So really, that's sort of all I have. I think I've gone on for long enough. But this is kind of what I want people to be thinking about, is what sort of way do we want to culturally interface with the world? And I think that people are very tired with the way that things are going currently, which is the one thing that everyone can agree on. Now, another example I could give, actually I don't know why I didn't start with this, is someone like Sixnine. If someone asked me, like, why do you think the culture of the West, of the English-speaking world, is in decline, I would say Sixnine, like, every day, like, every time. Sixnine, I think, is living proof that that America is collapsing like the Roman Republic. This is a guy who has committed pedophilic acts, is a guy who has committed several crimes, is just like objectively a despicable individual. And it's really not a laughing matter. He's genuinely terrible. Maybe the worst famous person out there. But he still has success. And he has success because he's so awful. Because people can't get enough. They want to know more. And I think that really demonstrates the sort of hold that postmodernism has on our culture. And that is why I think Marxist Romanticism is the fundamental answer to this problem. Is that Marxist Romanticism can initiate sort of this new enlightenment of our interface with political systems, of our interface with class society, in such a way where these sorts of revolutionary and not necessarily progressive, but progressive impulses are allowed to come out as they would have been during the great upheavals of the 19th century. So, that's pretty much all I got. I will develop this idea further. I am writing something, as I said, so just wanted to do a little thing tonight. So